Good evening, Jeff and Daniel. Terry Dyson here of Dyson Analysis. And I was asked by Daniel in some collaborative work we were doing if I would interpret an oil analysis series, and I'll focus on the last test. It's a Blackstone Labs test of a 2010 GTR. It looks to be mostly stock engine with modifications on quick disconnect type things, including injectors, a tune, airports, turbo inlets, the intakes, and the catless mid-pipe. I believe the car runs Mobil 1 0W40. It's been using Blackstone Laboratories for oil analysis, and I believe Jeff is the owner and a moderator at a GTR forum that I'm not particularly familiar with. First of all, a little background on me. I've been in the oil analysis business for 37 years. I do expert witness work, including American Bar Association asked me to do a tribology and oil analysis proof of concept on using basic oil analysis that you can get from laboratories for the average person, something I've always been interested in, and actually find out things. So I had worked a problem with a wrongful death lawsuit and did the oil analysis on an engine that really created the case before the forensic mechanics tore it down. I did the oil analysis. I went through an 8-hour plus deposition using our old premium oil analysis service. So I know oil analysis and have been doing this a long time. I also have a racing background, raced in IMSA with Oldsmobile and grew up racing in Indiana. So I am trying to coordinate this work here so that people on the forum can understand about oil analysis. I want you to know I'm a hired gun and normally work for anybody who hires me, and therefore I'm independent. And most of my career, I have used other laboratories. I did work in the R&D group at Cummins, ran their chemistry lab, did engine test cell work and R&D work on everything from 125 liters spark and compression and combi engines all the way down to 2 liter, 2.5. So at any rate, bottom line is that I think we can get you some very good information. Here's the thing. If a guy has looked at a lot of data and he's a formulator, he has engine test cell work at an R&D level for major OEMs, and he has a lot of oil analysis background, you can correlate data that other people can't do. And that's basically where I'm coming from. And I think Daniel explained to me that he may have gotten a little too excited. The point is I helped found bobistheoilguy.com. And I left there because I never bought it. I never owned it. Didn't want to at the time. But Bob Winters was my friend from the U.S. Navy, and we both set that up, and I was the science guy to begin with. And there were other fellows there that were really high science folks. Well, they've all left. And the reason is because the internet doesn't lend itself always to doing science. So what I'm telling you is that I'm going to interpret this data. I'm going to let you guys listen to the audio. It's something I never do. I do audio interpretation normally for my customers. But every 10 years, people flip out about who's using what oil analysis, what oil's good, what's wrong with my engine, et cetera, et cetera. So on the GTR, it's a race car sold in the U.S., marketed as a street car. And, in Japan, it's slightly set up differently. As you guys know, you're the experts. I'm not. You need to understand I do everything from nuke power plants down to Mama Joe's Toyota. So, but I'm going to show you where I can see things in this data that have either been ignored or not focused on. And the data is good for what it is. Blackstone is the McDonald's of oil analysis. I know the family that owns Blackstone. As a matter of fact, when I left Cummins, I actually gave viscometers and some old oil analysis equipment to Blackstone. And I used Blackstone as a cooperative agreement like I have with many different laboratories over the years, including Tribalogic. And I've been very happy with Tribalogic and Daniel's ability to get stuff done and to really focus on the science and make it. I've always been independent, guys. If I wasn't, I would have kept Bob as the oil guy, would have bought it and controlled it. And I wanted to do science. So that's all I care about. I'm a gearhead too. I care. And let's dive in and see what we've got. All I have is a cutoff sheet. There's no header on it except for the comments. And Jeff, you're the target here. We've got a 4,000 mile run at 10,500 on the first test. And then we've got 5 tests with the end point being a 15,000 mile run at roughly 18,000 miles. I'll work element by element and go from 2013 to 2015 and work this last set of data, but I have considered and looked at your trends. And I want to show you what I can see with this data and what most likely is being overlooked, and it can be problematic. So you've got a fresh engine, really. It's fairly highly modified, and you're using oil analysis this oil analysis is leaving you blind. And the reason I say that is I had my cooperative agreement with Blackstone. I had to quit because they do not have Fourier transforming infrared. That is a biggie. And you've got to know what you're doing with it. Most laboratory interpreters or analysts do not know enough and have not seen enough to be able to interpret it. This data doesn't even have that. And it goes back to the McDonald's thing. They didn't want to be a steak. They wanted to be McDonald's and be able to market at a price point consumers would capture and feel comfortable with. Is it good for what it is? Sure it is. And they're putting out fine data for that. Except for you can't tune. And when I say tune from oil analysis and from a tribological point of view, I'm talking about analyzing this because the power cylinder, the piston and the cylinder interface and the combustion chamber, they are what this fired air pump lives or dies by. So let's dive in with all that in mind. Beginning with aluminum, 4 parts per million, and these are inductive coupled plasma. You'll note that none of this testing is done to a standard. It's internal standards to Blackstone. I've been to their lab, and it's good data, but it's not scientifically tested in repeatability, that type of thing. And I have there's no problem with that, but as an end user, you guys who are not tribologists need to understand, even if you have a mechanical engineering degree, you're not going to understand this stuff because it's a combination of physics, chemistry, and mechanical engineering. And at about approaching 40 years, I'm starting to get a grip on this. So 4 parts per million is bearing alloy, piston alloy, and it looks reasonably good. I've got to tell you, at your 4,000 mile run at the 10,500, test 1, this was very elevated. I don't know what they said about it, but the trend has been good, mostly due probably to the fact that you take care of the car. But there were issues early on, and they have to do with a combination of things, and we'll talk about that. Chromium. I would have ended your 1 part per million of chromium probably by test 1, or pardon me, by test 2 or 3, by getting you to seat this thing better. You finally seated up, but the seating on the engine, on the rings, has been interrupted by fuel dilution. Okay, iron. Cylinder, valve train, bearing wear in general. Your 109 for a fresh GTR is incredibly high. It did not come into almost normal until the 4th test. I would not let you have gone that long. We would have been engaging it, and interactively, I would have been working with you to find out what's going on and correct it. You took a lot of wear over time. You are still elevated at 13 parts per million. This should be 10 parts per million or less, especially in a 1,500 mile run. Now, on an engine, it's not linear. It's geometric, and also the wear pattern sets up. Guys that track wear patterns, especially mechanical engineers, love to do that. This is not process engineering. A lot of variables here. Your wear pattern's normally set up and stabilized. The fact that you've been declining in the last 5 tests, we should have corrected way early on so that it would have gone to that steady state wear at test 2 or 3. Let's see, copper. Mostly rod end bearing wear. Some leachate out of intercoolers and heat exchangers. And this has been very high. The rod end bearing wear, like the cam wear and the crank wear I saw on that test 1, would scare the bejesus out of me. That would not have been good, and I wouldn't have kept it there. You get what you pay for, and and Blackstone's doing what they know. Also note, their universal averages are internal. They're from their own testing. I guarantee you they do not have a really big universe of GTR. Okay, so copper is still elevated. Iron's still elevated. Aluminum is coming into normalcy. And this is at almost 18,000 miles. Lead. There's not a lot of conforming lead material in this engine. And as a matter of fact, a lot of that may actually be bonding agents. 2010, I forget how much leaded bearing they were using on the mains. I don't think they were using any. So this was coming from somewhere else. Either leaded fuel initially, or adhesives and gasket making material. Okay, tin. It's also a conforming material. A lot of times in a modern engine like this, and especially a modified engine, the tin may be coming from something else. Note we see 3 parts per million of tin on the first test. Test 3, we see it again and it goes away. Something else was going on there. I don't know if some of the mods you made are contributing to this. And I would have to ask you. It also may be, did you pull the spark plugs? You can see some anti-seize there. You can see that I do a little more than a paragraph interpretation. So tin is critical, and it gives me a lot of things to look at. Molybdenum disulfide. This is an ester disulfide in the Mobil 1 formula. And you can see the formula being, the 040 hasn't changed a whole lot. And so those are normal. It's also a ring alloy. And I can't remember if this engine uses a modified iron or it's an alloyed iron. So just off, and I'm doing this off the top of my head with really no background data except what limited amount I have seen for GTRs. At any rate, molybdenum looks normal. Nickel. This is a wrist pin and a valve guide alloy in your engine. And it is high on the 10,000, 11,000 mile run. It has been coming in and out. This is problematic. So I don't want any valve guide wear, and I don't want any wrist pin wear, or piston pins, wrist pins, or whatever you want to call them. You do not want to be seeing that in a seasoned engine. This tells me there's some stress in those locations. And I would be drilling on that a little bit. Manganese. The reason you see manganese early on and you don't see any now is probably back in 2013, you were either using an anodized fuel that had some form of manganese as an anti-knock index improver, and or it's residual from the factory. And if I recall correctly, Nissan runs these in from the factory, but I can't remember perfectly. I think each engine was custom built at one time. So I would want to know about that early on. You don't have any now. The fuel. I ask customers what oil additives, what fuels, what fuel additives, what filters, what air filter, what oil filter, how do you service them? I know you have a green oil air filter set up on each bank. I know that you've made mods on the turbo inlets. I know some of the mods. Be careful about oiled air filters. They restrict airflow because they get dirty real quick. They trap a lot of fine stuff. And it will actually slow down airflow, which is bad for a turbocharged engine. and one that needs to breathe, especially one that's valve timed, has cam phasing, variable valve timing, and a lot of valve overlap. So we need to take a look at that. But the manganese is clean now, and it's probably, I don't know what kind of E85 are you using, pump E85, or are you buying it from Ignite or VP Racing Fuels? So I don't know where that manganese came from before. I'm not surprised. It looks pretty clean here, running E85. Silver, turbo bearing wear normally, we don't see any. I'm assuming you're running the stock turbos, and that looks good. Copper can be related to turbos depending on what turbocharger maker is in use here. Titanium, normally a trace marker in the oil. So that 1 part per million titanium that showed up on your very first test, that's a tracer most likely from the oil that you were using at the time. Potassium can be coolant, can be dirt, can be filtered air. It also most likely is your oiled air filter oil. And I don't know if you started using it somewhere around that test 2 where we would have seen it in the oil. But everything that ring touches on that oil film that's ingested or exhausted through that engine, I'm going to see. Okay. Let's see. So you've got a trace of potassium showing up, and I would want to know where that's coming from. Boron, that's a normal antioxidant, an anti-wear additive, and a TBN booster, and it's normal for the chemistry in the Mobil 1. Silicon. Your silicon is elevated. Your silicon has never really abated to a normal range. Normal range would be 10 parts per million or less for this engine. The wear-in, assembly lubes, gasket-making material will contribute to this. However, if it continues at a fairly high level, it's coming out of alloys, mostly from the pistons. So that's something to take a look at. Sodium. Normal trace in Mobil 1, 040. Not sure if you were using Mobil 1 040 back in 2013. But at 5 parts per million, I'm not too worried about it. There could be a trace in the chemistry, and or it's related to the potassium. Calcium. It's a calcium centric. It uses a calcium sulfonate and a calcium carbonate combination in this oil at 3,100 parts per million, normal. Magnesium sulfonate. It's also an additive. It's normal at 19 parts per million. Phos and zinc are also both normal. Zinc dithiophosphates with it's an ester. It's ZDTP, not ZDDP or zinc as guys want to talk about, and it's normal. Although this does not tell you the active phosphoric realm here, and we need FTIR to know that. You find that via anti-wear in FTIR. So we don't know how much active ZTP is left. Barium, it's a dye marker, and it's consistent on a fresh engine. It can also be grease on threads for an oil filter, and can be used as a tracer. Okay, so the ICP is pretty good. They do really good work there. But here's where we have problems. In the physical properties, we don't have FTIR. We have one viscosity at 100C. I'm going to ignore Seybolt Universal Seconds viscosity because probably anybody reading this is not old enough to even remember how those are set up. Cinestokes is 12.121. This oil starts at about 13.5 Cinestokes. And so there is some kind of either shear, which this oil does not shear. The viscosity index improvers are very good. They use very few. And they get the viscosity in this oil by actually building the base stocks so they don't have to rely on polymers that can break down and become deposit forming. Here's your problem. Flash point. Flash point is at measuring 355. this engine oil should be 455, 460. You can see it was, if that was it in the past, it looks like it was. You are running E85. In theory, there should be no more than 15, maybe maximum of 46% gasoline in here. The fact this is diluting so bad, ethanol does not harm flashpoint normally like this. So number one, you're fuel diluting. Number two, they're not giving you an accurate number, and they never have. The 445, 460, yeah, maybe close, but they're doing flash test, and it's an approximation. The new fuel chemistries, especially ethanol centric, they're not gonna approximate correctly here. So you're under-reporting fuel dilution that is causing some of the wear above. And the oil is good to fight fuel dilution. But long-term, it's going to affect things that are experiencing anti-wear and extreme pressure. Fuels dilution, 1%. I suspect that you are running somewhere between 2 and 3% fuels dilution. Antifreeze. Antifreeze is done by the values up above, and there is no actual antifreeze test. Water is a crackle test. It's inaccurate. I need to know Carl Fisher parts per million or an FTI or derivative. Same with the antifreeze. Because there are OH bonds in oil that the Carl Fisher can help us with on the chemistry, not just coolant. Insolubles. Their pentane insolubles is fantastic. I really love their formula. It does wonderful and does a great job. This is probably the best test here. And you've had pretty good results all the way through. So I know you're filtering the oil pretty well, but you're also changing it frequently. So the oil can disperse some things. The new oils cannot disperse post-EGR, and we're using valves for EGR now, to get those residuals out. They're non-polar. So you've got to have a good oil filter. I suspect you're using a great oil filter, and it's compensating for your fuels dilution. TBN was not measured. TAN was not measured, and you didn't do a particle count. That's fine. Particle counts on engines take a lot of expertise to know if it's even meaningful. So bottom line, you're blind. We need nitration, oxidation, anti-wear, soot, sulfur, sulfation, 40C viscosity, Carl Fisher, gas chromatography or FTIR fuels, or you're blind. This is too cool of a car to let it do this. So please consider using a better service and focus on the science. I don't care about marketing. I don't sell anything but my oil analysis interpretation. I very much appreciate you all listening. And Jeff, I hope that this encourages you. Look forward to hearing back from you. At your service, Terry.